The nurse placed my son on my chest and the whole world went silent. 19 hours of labor. 19 hours of clenched teeth and silent tears and my mother's voice saying endure, endure, endure. And now he was here. Perfect. Mine. I touched him slowly, learning his face. Then my fingers found a small dark birthmark behind his left ear, shaped like a teardrop. I laughed through my tears. My twin sister Chisim was in the room. She had been holding my hand through everything, wiping my face, whispering comfort. I trusted her completely. I closed my eyes, just for a moment, just to breathe. When I opened them, Chisim was placing a baby in my arms with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. My hand moved immediately to behind the left ear. Nothing. No birthmark. My breath stopped. I looked at Chisim. She looked back at me with my own face and smiled. Chisim and I were born the same but built differently. Same face, same voice, completely different souls. I was the one who stayed up reading. She was the one who stayed up dreaming. I worked slowly and built carefully. She wanted everything immediately and resented anything that arrived for me first. When Obina East came wealthy, respected, serious, and chose me, something shifted permanently behind Chisim's eyes. She smiled at our engagement. She danced at our introduction. But I sometimes caught her watching Obina's car from the window with an expression I didn't have a name for then. I have a name for it now. She got pregnant by a man named Festus who blocked her number the moment she told him. I held her while she cried. I believed she was broken and healing. I didn't know that a broken heart, left alone with the wrong friend, doesn't always heal. Sometimes it sharpens. Neka Braid visited the hospital the morning after both births. She moved through that ward like she owned it, sharp eyes calculating everything, warm smile hiding nothing good. She looked at my baby, then at Chisim's baby, then at the busy nurses rushing past. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she leaned close to Chisim and spoke softly enough that only Chisim could hear. I watched her lips move from across the room. I watched Chisim's face change, resistance first, then silence, then something worse than agreement. Consideration. Neka straightened up and smiled at me. Congratulations, Kaizoba. He's beautiful. I said thank you and watched her leave. What I didn't know was what she had just planted, that both babies looked alike, that the ward was chaos, that Obina's family would give my son everything while Chisim's son got nothing. She didn't suggest a switch directly. She didn't have to. Her name was Blessing Okoro, 24 years old, 8 months into her nursing career. Her mother needed knee surgery. Her brother's school fees were 3 months overdue. These are not excuses. They are the geography of how desperation becomes a door that evil walks through. Chisim approached her during a shift change, the specific window she had observed for 2 days. She pressed an envelope into Blessing's hand inside the linen room and spoke quickly. 90 seconds. That is all. Blessing pushed it back. Chisim pushed it forward. Blessing took it. In those 90 seconds, while Blessing faced the wall and prayed a prayer she knew would not be answered, Chisim stood in the hospital corridor with 2 infant boys in her arms and made a choice that would take years to unravel. She walked back into my room holding my son. She placed the other baby in my arms. She smiled. He is perfect, Chisim said, but her eyes didn't match the words. My hand moved instinctively to behind the baby's left ear. Smooth skin. Nothing. I checked again, slower this time, pressing gently. Where is the birthmark? I asked quietly. Chisim tilted her head with rehearsed concern. You were on medication for 19 hours. Some marks fade within the first day. Rest, sister. Before I could respond, Obina burst through the door with tears streaming down his face and his family behind him, and the room exploded into celebration, noise, joy, congratulations. Crashing over me like waves, Chisim leaned close and whispered, "Don't ruin this moment." I swallowed everything, the question, the fear, the cold certainty spreading through my chest, and smiled for the photographs. But that night, alone with the baby while Obina slept, I unwrapped him completely and searched every inch of his body. And no birthmark existed anywhere. Chisholm moved through the weeks after the birth like an actress who had finally found her defining role. She was present at every family gathering, not aggressively, just consistently. Helpful, warm, available. She brought food when nobody asked. She remembered every relative's birthday. She positioned herself close to Obina's mother with the patience of someone playing a very long game. Meanwhile, she had moved into a flat with the baby, my baby, though I didn't yet have proof, and begun sending photographs to Obina's family with careful captions designed to draw attention to the child's features. I watched her perform goodness every single day and felt something I couldn't articulate: the specific discomfort of watching someone wear kindness like a costume over something darker. Her friend Neka stayed close, whispering strategies, tightening the plan. I was the only one who could feel the whole structure vibrating underneath the surface. But feeling is not proof. My closest friend Gozi Adalik had been in the delivery room for 20 minutes before the nurse asked visitors to step outside. She had seen my son. She had seen his face, his small curled fingers, the mark behind his ear. She visited me 3 weeks later and spent an afternoon watching me move through my own house like a woman navigating foreign terrain. She sat in her car afterward and stayed there for a long time. That evening she called me Kaizoba, the birthmark. I saw it, yes, I said. My voice came out smaller than I intended. And now it's gone. Silence. What do you want to do? She asked carefully. I want proof, I said. The kind nobody can argue with. She called the hospital the next morning requesting delivery records. The receptionist put her on hold for 7 minutes and returned to say the file had been temporarily misfiled. Nobody misfiles maternity records. Obina Ease was a quiet man but not an unobservant one. He had fallen in love with my transparency, the uncomplicated honesty of a woman with nothing to hide, and so my new silences registered in him the way a change in weather registers in a farmer. He watched me hold the baby with complete tenderness but search his face with an expression he couldn't name. He watched Chisholm's visits become more frequent and more strategic. He watched a careful politeness that had replaced the natural ease between his wife and her twin. At Sunday dinner, Chisholm made a small unremarkable comment about babies resembling their mothers and held my gaze 1 second too long. Something passed between us that had no sound, but was deafening. That night Obina lay in the dark beside me and thought about his father saying truth doesn't announce itself. You only need silence enough to hear it breathing. He was very quiet. Something was breathing. Blessing Okoro had not slept properly in 6 weeks. She startled at small sounds. She made errors on charts that she had to correct before anyone noticed. Her supervisor called her in twice. On a Thursday morning, she locked herself in the hospital bathroom and called Chisholm, her voice barely a whisper. I cannot carry this anymore. I need to confess. The warmth drained from Chisholm's voice instantly. What replaced it was cold and precise and deliberate. If you speak one word, I will go to the board myself. I will show them the transfer to your account. You have no proof I told you anything. You will look like a nurse who sold a baby for money. Blessing's legs gave way. She sat on the bathroom floor with her back against the tiles and her whole body shaking. Then she did something Chisholm never anticipated. She called back. Chisholm, assuming panic, repeated the threat. Blessing pressed record first. I drove to my mother's house and asked Chisholm to sit with me in the garden. The frangipani was blooming. The air smelled unbearably sweet for what I was about to do. I told her everything: the birthmark, the missing mark, the 90-second window I had identified. The way her eyes hadn't matched her smile in the delivery room. Her response was practiced, concerned, almost convincing. You were exhausted. You were medicated. Some marks fade. Ada, you're frightening me with these thoughts. Our mother appeared and immediately aligned with Chisholm's performed worry. I stood to leave, defeated. Again, then, Chisholm's baby stirred in his carry cot and opened. His eyes and his face did something, went very still, very concentrated, brows slightly furrowed in deep focus. I had seen that expression 10,000 times on Obina's face, the exact same dimple pressed into the exact same cheek. I walked to my car with steady steps. sat down, pressed both hands flat on my thighs. That was not suspicion anymore. Chukwudi Dike had spent 11 years with the FKC before a case being quietly buried drove him out. His office on 6th Avenue had a frosted glass door and plain signage and the particular stillness of a man who has learned that people reveal everything if you give them enough silence to fill. I told him everything. He listened without writing anything down. When I finished, he said simply, "We don't chase feelings. We chase proof." Those 4 words settled something in my chest. He explained his approach: hospital records, CCTV, staff movements, transfer dates, everything systematic. The misfiled records, he said. That is not incompetence. Someone expected a request and prepared for it. He found the footage in 10 days. Not because it was easy, but because he knew exactly which administrator to approach and how. The corridor camera outside the delivery ward showed 47 minutes of footage with a 12-minute gap, not corrupted, deleted manually from a staff workstation. Nneka Braid had always mistaken cruelty for strategy. She convinced herself that her ability to identify weakness and press it was intelligence rather than malice. This is the comfortable lie that dangerous people build their identity upon. When Chisholm called her in growing panic, someone asking questions, Kaizoba to calm, something shifting, Nneka didn't hear danger. She heard an opportunity to tighten her grip. She appeared at Obinna's office herself, under the pretense of returning a borrowed book. She sat for 15 minutes and in a voice thick with performed reluctance said she was worried about Kaizoba, that she was saying concerning things about the baby, that she might need more support than anyone realized. Obinna listened pleasantly. His eyes were not pleasant. When Nneka left, she had the distinct feeling the conversation hadn't gone as planned. She was right. Obinna had already found the letter between the books on the nightstand. He had read it twice before Nneka arrived. Every word she said landed as confirmation, not warning. Mama Obiageli was 61 years old and had buried a husband and raised 4 sons alone and built a business from a single market stall. She was not a soft woman, but she was a just one. One afternoon she sat in her parlor with Chisholm's baby on her lap. She had offered to watch him, an arrangement that had become quietly regular, and the baby fell asleep in her arms, and she sat looking at his face in the afternoon light. She put the sleeping baby down, went to her wardrobe, opened the photograph album to the page she was looking for Obinna's naming ceremony. 34 years ago, she found the photograph, held it beside her phone, same still expression, same furrowed brow, same dimple in the identical position. She stood over her kitchen sink and ran the tap without needing water because she needed the sound. Then she called her pastor to pray first, because she had learned that some truths need to be laid before God before they can be carried to people. The cruelest part of what Chisholm had done was what it was doing to my marriage every single day invisibly. The way rising damp destroys a wall from inside before you see the surface crack. Obinna was choosing patience deliberately. I could see the effort, but he was watching me with the focused attention of a man assembling something from pieces he didn't yet have complete. The night it broke open was a Tuesday. Small things had accumulated. I had been distant through dinner. He had been watching me watch the baby. Finally he said quietly, "Sometimes I wonder if you have bonded with him at all." The word "him" landed like a stone in still water. I almost told him everything. My mouth opened. I stopped. Without proof. Truth sounds like madness. I had learned this already at my mother's house. "Trust me a little longer," I whispered. He nodded slowly, said nothing more. That night I wrote the letter, sealed it, placed it between 2 books, not hiding it, not ready. Chukwudi found Blessing at the hospital in Owerri, where she had transferred after her breakdown. He didn't approach her inside. He waited at a small buka across the road at lunch hour with 2 plates of rice. Because he had learned over 20 years that people speak more honestly when their hands are occupied with food, she sat without much resistance. She had been waiting for someone to come. He placed his tablet on the table and played 17 seconds of corridor footage. 2 infant-shaped bundles in a woman's arms. Blessing looked at it, then looked at him. "I have a recording," she said, "of her threatening me." He said I know, which was not quite true, but removed the weight of being the one who first broke the silence. She cried, deeply, without grace. The weeping of someone who had been holding something back for months. She signed the statement, forwarded the recording. She looked afterward like someone who had put down something very heavy. Because she had, Chisholm felt the shift before she could name it. A cousin mentioning a man asking questions near the hospital. Obinna receiving Nneka's visit with unusual coldness. Chizoba's behavior changing from distressed to composed in a way that felt like preparation rather than recovery. She called Nneka in rising panic. Move faster, Nneka told her. Before the ground shifts completely, plant your version everywhere. Make him associate Chizoba with instability. Chisholm drove to Obinna's office with food and rehearsed concern. She waited 20 minutes while he finished a meeting. He came out, saw her, and his expression did something that frightened her. It didn't. Hardened. It simply went very still. He listened to everything she said about her sister's worrying behavior with the polite attentiveness of a man who already knows the ending of the story being told to him. He thanked her for coming. He offered nothing, no alarm, no reassurance, nothing she could use. She drove back to Enugu understanding she had made everything worse. She was right. Mrs. Kidera Nuzu was unimpressive in conversation and devastating in court. She received me in Abuja, went through the evidence without visible emotion, and said one word. DNA. She explained the process carefully. Court-approved sampling. Sealed laboratory codes. No names until results were released. Full admissibility in family court proceedings. She arranged everything. I collected my son's sample myself at midnight while Obinna slept. My hands trembled. My decision did not. I labeled it Sample 1, wrapped it in the sealed kit, held it for a moment before sealing the envelope. I thought about the delivery room, about 19 hours, about a small dark mark shaped like a teardrop behind a perfect ear, about the moment I closed my eyes and the moment I opened them and the moment I understood that something had been taken from me inside a space that was supposed to be the safest room of my life. I sealed the envelope. I whispered, God, let truth speak louder than fear. Then I drove to Abuja before Obinna woke. He found it on a Friday evening while I was at Gozi's house. He had been looking for a pen and moved the books, and there it was. Fat envelope, sealed, his name in my handwriting. He sat on the edge of our bed and opened it. He read it without moving. The birthmark, the 90-second window, Chisholm's expression, Chukwudi Dike, the deleted footage, Blessing's confession, the recording, Nneka's calculated visit to his office, the lawyer, the DNA samples already submitted. He read it twice. He sat in his father's old room and looked at the window and thought about Chisholm arriving with soup, Nneka's well-packaged worry, his mother's quiet phone call 3 days ago. Obinna, come and look at Chisholm's baby when you have a moment. He understood everything now. He went to his desk, opened his laptop, and called Mrs. Nwozu's after-hours number. My name is Obinna Ease. I believe you are handling a matter for my wife. I am ready to be part of whatever comes next. We were both moving toward the same moment and neither of us knew how close the other was. We sat at dinner that evening. Jollof rice I had cooked with unusual deliberateness because I needed my hands occupied, and talked about small safe things. His work, a colleague's engagement, his mother's recipe for akika. We were both performing normalcy for the other. At a certain point we both reached for the water jug simultaneously. Our hands stopped an inch apart. We looked at each other. Not from the gesture, from the eyes. From the specific quality of the other person's silence. Obinna set the jug down. Whatever that laboratory returns, he said, I need you to know nothing changes for me. Not about you. Not about us. I stared at him. You read it. I called the lawyer, he said quietly. I told her I want to be part of this. I pressed both hands over my face and cried for the first time since the delivery room fully. Without holding back, he came around the table and held me without saying a word. The email arrived Monday morning at 7:43. Mrs. Nwozu called at 8. We drove to Abuja together, mostly in silence. The kind of silence that has already accepted whatever is coming. She opened the file without expression. Read it. Turned the printed results around and slid them across the desk. The findings were unambiguous. Sample 1, 0 paternal genetic markers matching the male donor. Sample 2, full paternal genetic markers confirming biological fatherhood. I read it once. Read it again. Then I became very still in a way that alarmed Mrs. Nuzu more than tears would have. I sat with the document for a long moment and felt the particular weight of being right about the worst thing you have ever suspected. It is not triumphant. It is grief and certainty arriving together. 2 printed copies, I said. Sealed. Already prepared. She said. I picked them up. Walked to Obina's car. Sat down. Where are we going? He asked. My mother's house, I said. I need everyone there. I called ahead and made sure they were all present before I arrived. My mother, 2 aunties, Uncle Emmanuel, Chisholm, and Neka, because she had planted the seed and she would sit in the harvest with everyone else. The sitting room smelled of agusi, and old wood, and the particular smell of my mother's house that had meant safety for 28 years. I sat down. I placed a sealed envelope on the center table. I looked at Chisholm. Open it. The room went completely silent. Chisholm's eyes moved to Neka. That one glance confirmed everything for everyone. Watching slowly, her hands reached for the envelope. The tearing sound seemed enormous in the silence. She read it. Her face did not collapse dramatically. It emptied like a building after everyone has evacuated. Structure still standing but nothing living inside. She passed it to my mother. My mother read it. Then she made a sound that was not a scream and not a wail, but something older. The sound of a woman discovering the floor was never there. Neka stood immediately, reaching for her bag. Uncle Emmanuel placed one hand on the back of her chair. He didn't touch her. He simply stood there. She sat back down. Chisholm confessed. Not immediately. There were minutes of attempted deflection that nobody in the room had patience for, but eventually, completely. The plan. Neka's suggestion. Blessing's bribe. The deleted footage. The threat she made to silence a frightened young nurse. As she named each thing. I watched a room understand what had been living among us undetected. When the recording was played, Chisholm's own voice, cold and threatening. My mother turned her face to the wall. Then Chisholm slid to her knees. I just wanted someone to choose me. She wept. Just once. I looked at my twin for a long time. If you had told me you were drowning, I said quietly, I would have swum out to you. You did not have to take anything. I would have given it freely. The room had no response to that, neither did she. The formal process took 12 days. Mrs. Nuzu managed every detail with the precision she applied to everything: court documentation, witnessed exchange, health verification, transfer of custody records. The day I held my real son for the first time, knowing fully, completely, with documented certainty that he was mine. I did not perform the moment for anyone. I sat in the back seat of Obina's car and held him and found the spot behind his left ear. The birthmark was there. Small, dark, shaped like a teardrop, exactly as I remembered from the first seconds of his life. I pressed my lips to it and stayed there for a long time. Obina drove without speaking. He knew the silence. When we arrived at the compound, Mama Obiageli was already at the gate. She had been there 20 minutes. She took the baby and held him up to the evening light and looked at him with the focused recognition of a woman who had known the truth for weeks. She looked at me over his head. You never stopped, she said simply. No. I said, I never did. There were consequences and I insisted on every one of them, not from bitterness, but from the understanding that mercy without accountability is an invitation for the same wound to find someone else. Blessing lost her nursing license and received a suspended sentence with 2 years of supervised community service in a pediatric ward. She accepted without argument. Some part of her had been waiting for appropriate consequence since the morning she turned to face a wall. Neka was convicted as co-conspirator. She served 4 months and relocated to Port Harcourt, into a city that had not yet heard the story. Whether she carried her conscience there with her, only she knows. For Chisholm, I requested no imprisonment. People were surprised. I was not. Mandatory therapy for 18 months, supervised and documented. Full repayment of every legal cost. A formal notarized admission filed to the family record. No unsupervised contact with my son for 2 years. Firm, structured, designed not to destroy her but to begin the work that envy, left unaddressed, never does on its own. She accepted every condition in a voice barely above a whisper. 1 year later, in November, when Harmattan had just arrived and the air carried that dry clarity that makes everything look permanent, I drove alone to Chisholm's son's naming ceremony. I sat near the back in a deep green wrapper and watched my sister receive relatives, with the specific quality of someone who has been rebuilt through difficulty, quieter than before, less certain, more real. At one point our eyes met across the compound. We held the look. She opened her mouth. I shook my head gently. Not yet. More road remained before we arrived at words, but I stayed until the end. I held her son once briefly, as he was passed around, and felt only the clean, uncomplicated love a woman feels for an innocent child who deserves everything good. I drove home to Oka in the Harmattan evening. Warm lights in the compound. My son's voice carrying from inside. Obina on the veranda, who looked up when I turned through the gate and smiled. I sat in the car for a moment. I thought about a delivery room, a birthmark, a 90-second window, an envelope on a table. I thought about how long the road had been. Then I got out of the car and my son came running across the compound with his arms wide open. I caught him. What God assigns to you cannot be taken forever. Truth always finds its way home. And when it does, hold it with everything you have.